Welcome to Gutsy Talks. I'm Rachel Larsson, your host, naturopath, and nutritionist, and I'm here to have real, honest conversations that can help you heal your gut, calm your mind, and fall back in love with food. Together with leading health experts, we'll dive into all things gut health and explore the deep connections between your gut and overall well-being, so you can feel empowered to take control of your health and live your best life. If you love all things gut health, follow me for more on Instagram at rachel.larson or head to rachellarson.com.au. Now, let's get into today's episode. I'm very excited for this episode today as we are covering one of my most favorite topics and one that I know affects so many people. This is, of course, bloating, and studies show that up to about 18% of the general population experience bloating at least once per week. Now, I work with a demographic of people that can be experiencing bloating every day, multiple times a day, or in fact, never goes away. So this is a big issue, and it's certainly not a case of, oh, I feel a little bit uncomfortable. Bloating is having significant effects on these people's lives, which is why it's so important to talk about. Now, what we know is that bloating is often seen in younger people and more so in women, but that doesn't mean that if you are older, male, it can affect everybody. But what we know is that this population of people tends to be the most affected. And again, that is reflected in the people that I see. So it is an important topic to talk about. The last thing that we want to be experiencing is bloating, because what we will be going through is exactly how it is impacting our lives. But most importantly, what's causing it? How do we treat it? How do we test for it? All of these things that probably to date you've been told it's just who you are. You just need to learn to put up with it, right? I'm sure you've heard that, or you've heard someone close to you saying that that's what they've been told that they have to do. So we're going to absolutely address that BS and get to what we can really do about bloating. So first things first, you're probably wondering, well, what causes bloating? Now, this is in some ways the holy grail that we're trying to find for many people. Now, I know all the causes of bloating and I help my patients identify the exact cause of their bloating. But looking at it from a general sense, we could be looking at a myriad of things. It can be, as I say, simple as overeating or eating too quickly. That certainly contributes to bloating. Then we have things that go from like food intolerances, constipation, stress, or being in a place of sympathetic dominance, which is that fight, flight, freeze mode. IBS, other medical conditions, things like inflammatory bowel disease, even things like PMS, there are so many things that cause this symptom of bloating. And there is no one answer that fits every single person, which is why it can feel like you're chasing this elusive, impossible thing, especially if you're using the wrong strategy, because people will be trying to pigeonhole you into a certain cause, or because it's not straightforward as to that there is a single cause for bloating, it can kind of get put into the too hard basket. This is just who you are. So that's not true. We know that there are several causes, and if you have the right strategy, you can find it, which is what I'm going to be sharing with you today. I do want to be sharing with you the blueprint that I'm using with all of my patients that will help you understand the cause of your bloating in an individual manner, and then how you can treat it and heal it in a step-by-step manner. So that's what we want. We want a strategy. We want it to be something which you can follow, but also individualized to find your root cause. Because once again, not every person is the same. In fact, no two people are the same. So it does need to be individualized. Now, when we're talking about bloating, there's a question of like, when should I be worrying about my bloating? And really, that is such an individual answer. If you're worried about your bloating, it is likely that it warrants, to be worried about. I like to say, if you're looking for two things, that is, I guess, a hallmark of when does it fall into this is normal versus this is a problem. I would be thinking about chronicity in terms of how long or chronic you've been, or how chronic this symptom is, and how it affects, and if it affects your quality of life. So an example of, I guess, bloating that is normal in a sense where it is expected would be if you were to go on a flight to Europe, and it's, as we know, living in Australia, that is a day and a bit kind of journey. Now, on that flight, you're probably not pooing, you're probably not drinking enough water, you might be eating plain food, which doesn't have a lot of fiber, you're not moving, you're a bit blocked up and you're a bit bloated. That is a normal response to bloating. So I wouldn't get too worried about that. No, it's not comfortable. We want to, alleviate that discomfort as soon as possible, but it's not something that you need to be like, wow, that was completely out of the blue. Like that makes sense because we can kind of see all these pieces that have added up to that. If you, on the other hand, are someone who's waking up bloated, or you're having your morning breakfast or your morning coffee, or if you wear, jeans that are slightly too tight and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm so bloated. And this is happening not just once, but it's happening here, there, everywhere, maybe at daily. That's clearly something that is, trying to signal that we need some help. So those are just two examples, but that's what I guess I'm trying to show you that there are sometimes times and places where being bloated is the expected thing that your body's going to be doing versus other things which are just like, no, no, doesn't make sense. Now, the problem is that when it comes to bloating, doesn't matter if it falls into the camp of this doesn't make sense, this is too chronic, it's too often, what's supposedly triggering me is fairly benign. The problem is that often the system that we're working with, being that, I guess, that general healthcare system that runs the country, they're not great at looking at these complex, necessarily functional conditions. And in my experience and in my patients' experience, it kind of we get this feedback and this health advice, which isn't very helpful. We do get told it's just who you are, it's just normal, you just need to restrict your diet as if that's an easy thing to do or something you should be doing. You just have to live with it, or, you're going to be receiving some other advice, which really doesn't kind of get you any closer to understanding your, really like the root cause. So that's the problem is that we're just kind of being told that even the things that aren't normal are normal. They're not, right? Very clear. If that's the one thing that you're taking home for this episode today, it's that those types of situations aren't normal. Now, before I get into actually how we start to address our bloating root cause for good, I want you to imagine a scenario. Now, let's say that you want to heal your gut from the root cause, break free from bloating, and you need to do this to regain your confidence, resolve your symptoms, and have lasting food freedom. So let's say you've been told, like, I need to heal my gut from the root cause and break free from bloating. How would you do it? Okay, so have a think about it. But there's two options that I see in clinic and I see in my experience. There's option A, where there is an approach that has you feeling overwhelmed and confused. You might be searching for answers and solutions without a clear strategy, and you feel like you're stuck in a cycle of restriction and just symptom management. So that's option A. Option B is where you are following a step-by-step system for achieving food and symptom freedom, and of course, total clarity about your health. Now, which one would you choose? It's a no-brainer. It's option B. We know that we want a step-by-step strategy, but unfortunately, your experience would probably have you thinking, well, I've been following option A for a while. I've been going to countless one-on-one appointments, and yet I'm unwell and exhausted. I'm still struggling with symptoms, and I'm being told there's nothing I can do. I'm overwhelmed with conflicting advice. I am exhausted with my dietary changes and exclusions. I feel like I'm caught in a vicious cycle of stress, symptoms, symptom stress, and you don't know your root cause. So that's where most people are unfortunately working in an attempt to try and find their bloating root cause. Option B, which is obviously what anyone is like, no brainer, I want option B. This is the strategy which I want it to be, and it can help you achieve food freedom. So you can eat totally freely without the symptoms, to feel confident in your body, to have clarity about your health, to have emotional freedom. Like we talk about the physical impact, but my goodness, the emotional impact is huge when it comes to chronic bloating. You can enjoy socializing and you can wake up feeling refreshed, light, and you have energy. All of things that if you're not experiencing bloating, you're probably taking for granted, because these are the things where that quality of life aspect is severely impacting these issues. So the good news is that what I'm going to be sharing with you today will help you with using an option B approach, teach you how to heal your bloating, SIBO, and IBS so you can regain that confidence, resolve your symptoms, and have lasting food freedom. So this is what this whole episode is about. Now, you might be thinking, okay, how do I do this? So this is the strategy that I've been teaching my patients since 2016, and it's broken down into 10 steps. Now, you might be thinking, oh my goodness, 10, why 10? Why isn't it just one? Well, it's because we're addressing the root cause. If we had a one-step process, it would have, I wouldn't be talking about bloating, right? Things would be fixed. It would be as easy as take this, don't eat that food, we're done. it is very clear that bloating can be a complex issue, more complex than we probably understand it is, which is why we need to have a holistic approach. One, two, maybe even three steps are probably still only working with bloating on a superficial, level where you might be looking at symptom management. That stuff doesn't interest me in terms of long-term sustainable outcomes. It is important to have a superficial symptom relief aspect, but it actually is never going to give you that freedom that you need and desire. So we need our process to be in depth to meet the issue where it's at, which is, of course, complex, right? So the goal is to have sustainable management strategies. So after we've addressed those symptoms, which may be an initial thing that we're wanting to do, and address the root cause, ultimately we want to be able to nurture and nourish ourselves and what our own body needs so that our bloating doesn't return. That is the real goal that we're wanting to do is understand what has gone wrong in my body for me to get this symptom of bloating, to then understand, right, well, what do I need to do so that I can manage those things so that that bloating doesn't come back. And everyone will have a different set of circumstances and different set of things that they need to be managing. Now, again, I know that 10 steps sounds like a lot, but it's not overwhelming when you understand the why. And I think I have explained that in a sense where we're not looking at superficial stuff. We're going deep, guys. So we need a few steps to get there, that they don't happen all at once. They're steps, not a cannonball of 10 things that we need to do. So it is a layered approach. And also realizing that this is a months to years process. I know that doesn't sound sexy and it's not the 7-day gut reset that you're hoping for. Those things totally can get rid of your symptoms, but again, or at least reduce your symptoms temporarily, but they're not the genuine healing that we're after. So we need to know that these things are going to take time, and 10 steps over a period of that time isn't overwhelming because, again, it's a step by process. It is not a cannonball of things being thrown at you. So the question that you're definitely wondering now is how to get rid of bloating naturally. And this is what I'm going to start to share with you right now. Here we're going to get into it. This is the 10-step process. So the first step, step one, is planning your success. Now, planning sounds boring, right? We want to get into testing, we want to get into supplements. No, 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 no. We need to plan every good every good thing that happens in terms of building a house, anything needs a good plan. Otherwise, you are just going at it with no sense of direction. Now, as part of our plan, the first thing that I do and that you should be starting to do is looking at your health history. This is actually going to be, I guess, the blueprint and start to give us a bit of a skeleton as to what we need to start looking at and areas that may kind of raise a concern and kind of start to flag where your root cause of your bloating has started. Now, looking at your history, I'm talking about looking at everything that's happened to you from birth. Literally sitting down and timelining your history. It is so important because the clues are there. Bloating didn't spontaneously happen, even if it started, one day over the next, and there's no obvious thing, there is something that was possibly and most probably playing out. Viruses, stressful events, different medications that you'd been on, which at the time maybe weren't causing you symptoms, but has kind of caught up to you. It's a bit like the perfect storm has finally been created. Now you might say, well, I had gastro when I went to, Bali, or I didn't reheat that leftovers good enough, and then I got gastro, and then I got bloating. There's sometimes super obvious signs, and there is often not. So we need to timeline, and this is going to really set the scene for where we need to go next. Now, that is the first thing we need to do with plan. And once we have this information, we can start to move on to the next step. Now, the next step is going to be addressing the question, how do we relieve bloating fast? Because like we said, this is a months to years process. So step two is all about taming your triggers. This is where we want to support the mind-gut connection, which I know it's not sexy, it's boring, we've heard it before. The influence though of the mind on your gut is absolutely number one priority. It is undervalued. It's put aside as, oh no, it's not that. It's got to be a supplement that I'm missing. I guarantee you, most of my patients, in fact, all of them, have had some sort of nervous system component. And those that support it do see progress and change far better, quicker, and easier, and sustain those results because they've worked on the thing that's really driving it. And often, I guess, that missing link, and that is a nervous system that is calm. So, calming that nervous system is part of that thing that we need to do to tame the triggers. We also need to really just assess how we're eating our food. This could be a sense of rushing your food versus eating mindfully. It could be that you've noticed that you're not chewing your food. You may be chewing it 5 times, and you've heard the number. You want to be chewing your food about 20 times. So there are things that we can start doing which again don't sound sexy because they're very accessible and they're probably spoken about a bit, and they're not, the new fandangled supplement. They're actually, the way that we live our life. But again, these have bigger impacts than you actually realize. So they are to be prioritized. Now, if we do need a supplement to support our digestion and to give a bit of relief, this is when we can use some of those things. So it could be ginger, peppermint, a digestive enzyme. There are different things depending on what you think your issue is that we can start to utilize at this stage. So depending on if you've been diagnosed with celiac disease or diagnosed with lactose intolerance or IBS or inflammatory bowel disease, there are certain supplements that we can start to use at this stage that, just important to remember, are working at a symptom relief level. So we want to be using these knowing that we do need to go deeper, but they are very helpful because it's giving us a sense of relief now. Now, once we've got that plan in place and we're feeling a little bit more calm in our body, we move on to step three, which is testing and not guessing. I am not a guesser. In fact, I think practitioners and people that want to guess with their health are ultimately throwing money away. I know the tests are expensive, but they are far cheaper than the trial and error process of not having those results to work to. Now, in addition to utilizing GPs and specialists and other practitioners that you might be working with, we can consider functional testing. And functional testing is where we start to look at, I guess, the function of your body and the function of your gut versus perhaps looking and trying to find a pathology. And a pathology is another word for, I guess, a condition or a disease, something that could easily be diagnosed, such as celiac disease. There are a lot more things that could be going on in the body than just those diagnosed conditions. It can be things that are maybe affecting your gut and making it work at a suboptimal level. So I'm going to share with you my three key functional tests that I love, and that I try to get all my patients to do. Of course, we need to maybe assess if it's appropriate, but these are often rolled out with each person at some point in their journey. So they are a SIBO test, which, if you've listened to it recently, there is a whole episode on SIBO, and it is a huge cause of bloating, and it's the number one cause of IBS. There is a complete microbiome test. And if you go back to episode 2 with Dr. Brad Leach, then you will know that not all stool tests are made the same and that the metagenomic cobiome tests are the bee's knees in terms of what we're wanting to have in a test and what I utilize in my patients. And then there is the organic acid test, the oat test, which I love to use as it helps me identify if there's a yeast problem. We can't assume it's yeast. We can't assume it's a gut microbiome dysbiosis. We can't assume the details of these things, which is where we need the tests to tell us. And that will ultimately help us come up with our treatment plan moving forward. Now, while those tests are pending, we need to be looking at food because you're needing to eat, right? And so that question of what foods are causing your bloating and why do you get bloated after meals? This is what we are addressing in step 4. This is where we're starting to look at your food in a place to see, can we make short-term modifications that are going to give you a bit of relief, decrease inflammation in the gut, and support the healing process, knowing that in the long term, we want all of those foods back in the diet and have a highly diverse, highly plant-based, high fiber diet. Like that is the goal. We want it to be all about inclusion, not exclusion. But we may need to be looking at, is there any short-term changes that we need to consider for where we're at right now? Because our gut and your gut may not be in a place where it can tolerate those foods. So we need to meet it where it's at. Now, these could be issues in relation to FODMAPs, histamine, sulfur, salicylates, oxalate, gluten. These are all different potential triggers in the diet that we want to be scanning for. And there's different symptoms that can kind of make you start to think, oh, maybe I have a histamine issue, or no, it's just more FODMAP, or maybe it's both. And this is where we need to understand how we can support you where you're at right now, knowing that this is not your forever place. And I do want to mention that because if you're working with someone who has put you on some sort of elimination or restrictive diet, you need to be checking in with them if there's the plan to get you off this. If there's a plan to move through this sense of restriction and this genuine restriction to a place of abundance. That is what we need. There is studies upon studies showing that a highly diverse plant-based high fiber diet is essential for a healthy microbiome. If you have been told to follow a diet, and I'm talking even about the low FODMAP diet, if you've been told to just follow the low FODMAP diet in an indefinite sense, where there is no strategy to get off it, that is a red flag. That is not a sustainable strategy, and inadvertently long term could be causing more microbiome issues, even though it's serving a purpose at the time where you think it's helping with your, reduced symptoms. So just a bit of a note to that, just kind of check in with what you're doing and who you're working with if what you're doing is not looking at more that inclusive goal at the end. Also, while I wait for these results to get back, we're looking at step 5, which is a soothing and supporting phase. Now, because we don't want to be having these results back and going gun ho and throwing the kitchen sink at these results, if you've got a really inflamed gut, now you may already know because you might have seen a specialist or a GP to have been diagnosed with, for example, IBS or diverticulitis or inflammatory bowel disease or gastritis or reflux. And you know that there are issues at hand, and all of these are relatively inflammatory. We want to ensure that now that we've got these, but we're waiting on more of those functional tests, that we are soothing your digestive system. We need a soothed digestive system to be able to cope with potentially what's coming up. It wouldn't be fair for it to not be supported and for us to be thinking it can handle treatment. It likely can't. So let's just kind of do what we can to support it. And these could be things like using things like turmeric or slippery elm or zinc carnosine or glutamine. And each condition will have a specific, I guess, profile of nutrients and herbs, which are shown to be helpful. The other thing that we want to be looking at is trying to regulate our bowel motions. If you're someone that is constipated or have diarrhea, we also know that those are two signs of a dysfunctional system. It could be something which, again, we can't actually help at this point because it's a part of that larger piece of the puzzle that we're still, I guess, waiting on those results for. But we can kind of support it in a symptom sense. And especially if you're constipated, we need that to be working. We need symptom relief for that. Using certain types of magnesium citrate or magnesium oxide, different herbs and different foods like kiwi and rhubarb and flaxseed. These things can help regulate and speed up bowel motions. Opposite would be with diarrhea, there are certain probiotics that can potentially help, or maybe just by decreasing the inflammation, which you're doing in step 5, that's going to reduce that symptom of diarrhea. So we want to get those slightly more regulated. Now the results are back, and now we are hopefully getting more information into asking that question or answering that question. Why do you feel bloated all the time? Now, step 6 and step 7 are all about addressing the small and the large intestine, which is what those SIBO and stool tests have been assessing. This is where we can address and assess if we have a certain type of SIBO and how to support that. What's going on with our microbiome? Do we have, low diversity? Do we have an infection of a parasite or a pathogenic bacteria? Or do we have very low pancreatic elastase? Do we have high methane? Do we have high hydrogen sulfide? All of these things you couldn't possibly guess and, know with certainty that you have unless you test. Only when you have these results can you understand and address step 6 and step 7, which is the small intestinal dysbiosis and the large intestinal dysbiosis with targeted strategies. So this is why testing is so important because it helps us really create a targeted treatment plan specific to you because no two people will be the same. Things that can cause bloating, my goodness, anything that I've mentioned here, you could have a SIBO status of a methane or hydrogen sulfide dominance. So many different factors in that large intestine could be adding to bloating. So there's not one thing that I'm looking for. It's really looking at the whole picture in terms of what it is painting. And, you'll start to see trends when you start to see those results. We then move on to step 8, which is how to heal your gut from the root cause in terms of what is the root cause. Now, over this time, you're probably getting a bit of a sense, especially what we were doing in step 1, which was looking at your health history. It actually is going to tell us where that root cause is. Like we kind of were looking at it at the first step. It's just we weren't focusing on it because at that point in time, there's no point focusing necessarily everything on the root cause if that has been able to provide a cascade of chaos in the body. We've needed to address that chaos before we really start to get down to that nitty-gritty and that root cause. Now, that root cause we can be looking at in terms of, well, what conditions have we now established that we have, or dysfunctions in the body? Do I have a period of stress, or have I had gastro in my history? There's lots of things coming to the front. We are now starting to figure out, all right, well, I can see a lot of these risk factors. What could they potentially like? Is this my root cause? Now, when we're looking at something like SIBO, we know that there are like 4 root causes that we need to be looking at. There can be digestive insufficiency, such as a lack of enzymes or acids. There can be motility dysfunction, which could be the result of stress or food poisoning or even mold toxicity, stealth infections. There could be cases of impaired outflow where we're looking at, have you had any surgeries? Could this be, even things like cesareans or hysterectomy, endometriosis, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome? Like there are different things that can impair the outflow. And there's also medications that we know can increase your risk of developing SIBO. So these are like our root causes that we could be looking at. And that's where we want to start honing in because addressing these will start to give us those long-term results. If we are just focused on step 6 and step 7, which is, for example, getting rid of the SIBO with antimicrobials and getting rid of the E. coli pathogen that we found in your stool sample, I guarantee you that those issues or similar to those issues that you identified will come back if we don't have that root cause identified. So this is where that long-term support needs to be focused at or targeted at is this step 8, which is the root cause. Moving on to step 9 is to heal your leaky gut. Now, the reason why I don't test for leaky gut any sooner is because if you've got bloating, if you know you've got gastritis, if you've got SIBO, got large intestinal dysbiosis, the chances are you've probably got a bit of a leaky gut, right? So what we do is we address as many of those, as much of those results as possible to see if our symptom picture changes, to then say, do I still need to test if I maybe have leaky gut there? If you do test and you have intestinal permeability, which is done through the lactulose and mannitol urine test, then further gut healing is needed. If it's come back as negative, then that is something that we can say we don't have. It's super kind of black and white with that. Do I need further healing? Do I not? Lastly, which is answering the question, how to stop the bloat from coming back. And this is where we want to secure your future of freedom, which is in step 10. Now, what we've spoken about is that it is so important to be addressing those root causes that we've identified in step 8. That is probably my biggest take home is support your root causes. But then there are other things that we need to keep in mind as well is what does our diet now look like to support a healthy microbiome? Should I do and do I need to be continuing a more mindful way to eat? Do I need to be managing my nervous system a bit better to support sustainable results? The answer is yes. So this is where we start looking at more those long-term lifestyle changes. And the way that we approach this is one of sustainable imperfection. It is the term that I want everybody to remember is that it is something that we're going to be doing in a sustained way, but it is totally fine to be doing it imperfectly, meaning perfection is not the goal. It is only adding an unnecessary and unrealistic, expectation of ourselves into the equation, which we don't need, as if we haven't had a hard time with this bloating. But it's also just something where it doesn't account for going on holidays. It doesn't account for those busy days at work. It doesn't account for birthdays where you're going to have a glass or two of champagne and some chalky cake. These are things that we want sustainable imperfection because we know for the majority of the time we are supporting ourselves in a way that we know our body is loving, we're feeling good doing it. and building resilience enough so that we can be imperfect and do the human thing and have a beer and a parma at the pub, or you're going on a holiday and you want your gelato. Like there are just things that we know need to be enjoyed in life. And a process of sustainable imperfection is supporting that, that you don't need to be walking this very rigid and narrow line. So that is the 10 steps. Now go back and listen to it if you like. What were they again? Because it is very clearly outlined, step one, two, all the way through to 10. But this is literally all that you need to address your bloating from the root cause. And as I said, it's this blueprint that I've been using with my patients since 2016. And no, it's not a cookie cutter. I know that when people hear strategies and blueprints, they're like, oh, that's right, everybody's the same. No, it is not. It is the skeleton. It is the framework that we then put onto, I guess, a person's experience to then individualize it. Like we said, everybody is different. We need to have a strategy that has that flexibility to explore and support those differences. No two people are the same. Now, if you are absolutely desperate to learn more about this, or you're just like, I'm so sick of, following that option A, which was that confused and overwhelmed and stuck in a cycle strategy, and I want this option B, which is that step-by-step clear strategy, please look at the show notes. I'm offering a limited time 10% off Bloated to Body Confident. You'll see the details in the show notes with the discount code for you to access it and start your healing journey. As I've said, it is a limited offer. So if you do have any questions in the meantime, comment on the pod, email me, message me on Instagram. I would be more than happy to help. I just wanted to make it super clear and super helpful for you to know that there is a way that you can overcome the bloat. Even if you've never been told that before, I'm here telling you that it is 100% possible, and that we do need an individualized strategy to do that. And this is how. Thank you so much for listening, and check out the show notes for more information. Thanks for tuning into Gutsy Talks. I hope today's episode left you feeling inspired to take the next step in your gut health journey. If you're ready to dive deeper, head over to rachellarsson.com.au. There's a range of courses and resources waiting for you. If you loved this episode, I'd be so grateful if you shared it with others who might benefit from this information. And so you don't miss out on future Gutsy Talks, be sure to hit follow and leave a review. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'm Rachel Larsson, and I can't wait to connect with you again for our next Gutsy Talk.